All right, today we are heading way up north to the high Arctic. We're going to uncover the story behind America's northernmost military installation. It's an incredible history that stretches all the way from World War II bombers to the modern Space Force. And really, it all kicks off with one simple question. I mean, it seems a little strange, right? In this day and age of satellites and drones and everything else, why would you maintain a fortress of ice so far north? Well, the answer is just this fascinating story of geography, technology, and 80 years of constantly shifting global threats. So today, it's called Ivittuut Space Base. It's this remote, super high-tech outpost run by the U.S. Space Force, and it's sitting more than 1,200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, right there in Greenland. You know, it's a place where the sun never sets in the summer, and it's pitch black all winter. But its story, well, it definitely doesn't start with satellites. Yeah, to really get why the U.S. Space Force is in Greenland today, we have to rewind the clock. We're going back over 80 years to a time when the world was literally at war, and this massive island of ice suddenly became one of the most strategic places on the entire planet. You know, before 1940, Greenland was pretty much a remote and often forgotten Danish territory. But when war exploded across Europe, this giant island almost overnight became one of the most critical pieces of real estate on the planet. So here's the key moment. When Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, Greenland was suddenly cut off, totally vulnerable. A year later, the Danish envoy in Washington, get this, he signs an agreement without getting approval from his occupied government at home, and that gave the U.S. the legal green light to defend the island. That single act, that's what opened the door for everything to come.
And why did the U.S. want in so badly? Well, there were three huge reasons. First, they needed airfields, these WWII sites, that were basically crucial stepping stones for planes making the long journey to Europe. Second, the weather in the Arctic is what creates the weather in Europe, so if you control Greenland's weather stations, you give the Allies this massive forecasting advantage. And third, and this is a weird one, Greenland had the world's only major source of cryolite, which is a mineral you absolutely needed to produce aluminum for all those Allied warplanes.
Okay, so the war ends, but the American presence? That didn't. As one global conflict faded away, a new, colder one was just heating up, and the mission in Greenland was about to get much bigger. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? The new enemy was the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden, the Arctic was the shortest, most direct route between the two superpowers. Greenland's strategic value just went through the roof. So in 1951, the U.S. launched this top-secret mission they called Operation Blue Jay. The whole point was to build a gigantic airbase called Thule, way up in northwest Greenland. It had to be big enough to handle long-range nuclear bombers. And the scale and the speed of this project were, frankly, just mind-boggling. It all started with a massive armada. We're talking a fleet of 120 ships sailing all the way from Norfolk, Virginia, and they were carrying every single nut, bolt, and plank of wood needed to build an entire city from scratch in the middle of the Arctic. And on board that fleet were 12,000 construction workers. A lot of these guys were hardened engineering veterans from World War II, and they were tasked with working around the clock in one of the absolute most inhospitable places you can imagine on Earth. And they did the whole thing in just 104 days. It was this frantic race against time to get it done before the brutal Arctic winter froze the sea solid and plunged the land into 24-hour darkness. An entire city and an airbase built from nothing on permafrost in a single summer. Just an incredible feat of engineering.
With Thule Air Base now up and running, the U.S. had a brand new forward operating base, a front line for both offense and defense in the escalating Cold War.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the dual role this base played. On one hand, it was an offensive spearhead, putting nuclear bombers like the B-36 and B-47 thousands of miles closer to Soviet targets. But at the same time, it was also a defensive shield. It was a base for fighter jets that could intercept any Soviet bombers trying to come over the North Pole to attack North America. So the base itself, as incredible as it was, wasn't the only secret project going on in Greenland. Oh no. The U.S. Army had an even more audacious plan, one that was hidden from the public and buried deep inside the ice sheet itself.
It was called Project Iceworm. The plan was brilliant, really. Step 1. Build a public research station called Camp Century and power it with a cool new portable nuclear reactor. But this was all a cover. The real goal was to use tunnel boring machines to dig this vast network of tunnels and silos to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles, literally right under the Soviets' nose.
But the plan had a fatal flaw. You see, the Greenland ice sheet,
It looks so solid, so permanent, but it's actually in constant motion. It's a glacier. Scientists realized the immense pressure from all that shifting ice would eventually deform and just crush the missile tunnels and silos. The whole thing was unworkable. So Project Iceworm was officially abandoned in 1966. But even as Project Iceworm was failing, technology was changing the mission yet again. The age of the bomber was giving way to the age of the missile, and Thule's role, well, it was about to evolve once more.
And this chart just illustrates that pivot perfectly. With the invention of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, the base was no longer about projecting power out with bombers. Instead, its location made it the absolute perfect place to see threats coming in. It was a complete 180 in philosophy.
And that brings us to today. The base, now Pituffik, is a cornerstone of NORAD. That's the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Its incredibly powerful radars give us early warning for any ballistic missile that might be launched over the Arctic. And its sensors are critical for what the Space Force calls space domain awareness, which is basically a fancy way of saying keeping an eye on every single satellite and piece of junk in orbit. So when you zoom out and look at its 80-year history, you can see this really clear evolution. It started as a logistical hub in World War II, it transformed into a nuclear fortress during the Cold War, and now it's become this high-tech sentinel for the 21st century.
The technology is changed completely. The enemies have changed. Even the name of the base has changed. But the one constant, the single reason the U.S. has stayed in Greenland for over 8 decades, is its unmatched geographic position right at the top of the world. It's all about location, location, location.
And that really brings us to the future, doesn't it? Because with climate change opening up brand new shipping lanes and sparking new geopolitical competition in the Arctic, the strategic importance of this place is only going to grow. So you have to wonder, what role will this sentinel of the Arctic play in the decades to come?